Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Multispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah Show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. Be a part of the program. It is free call 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624 or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalai. I'm your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah Show kicks off this week. Our gadget of the week this week is actually a trio, a collection of gadgets that you'll have to have all together. It is USB-C. This has taken over my life, quite frankly. My body's ready for USB-C because it allows me to pack one charger, one device, and charge all of my stuff. And it was either this weekend or the weekend before, my wife purchased a dog collar. And apparently that has even a Type-C charger built into it. But of course, as one charger becomes prolific, obviously you have to have the chargers to charge those devices. And the ones that they include with those devices are not always the best ones. In fact, many of the Type-C chargers, particularly the ones that are included with tablets or phones, are, by contrast, very low power and very cheaply made. And so I've been on the lookout since owning my first device that had Type-C charger a few years ago to find the perfect Type-C charger. And what I found is that as much as I don't like Apple products, the Apple 95 or 97 watt Type-C adapter and their cable is the only one to date that I have purchased that works with every laptop I have tried it with, to include Apple's MacBooks, which actually work on many chargers. But HP has a lot of computers that are real picky about what kind of charger they will accept. Additionally, some of the older ThinkPads like the X270, they had Type-C charging, but it was on the very early onset, and so only chargers that produce higher than 45 watts of power delivery are able to actually charge those kinds of computers. But every laptop I've connected to charges off of the Apple one. So if you want to be guaranteed that everything's going to work, then go that route. But many of you, as I did, am looking for less expensive ones. So when my kids back to school, the school sent them home with new Chromebooks, which all are powered by Type-C. The problem is I didn't want them using the school's power adapter because they charge $65 to replace that thing, and it doesn't even look like a terribly great power cord. So here are some other options for you. The first is the Anker Type-C power block. Now this is a 65 watt power block. You can buy the Anker cable and the Anker power block. The power block's $40 and the cable is $20. Now to put that in perspective for you, the Apple 97 watt power supply is just around $90, and then their cable's another 20 something on top of that. And so this is significantly cheaper. This is down in that $60 range. Now, for general day-to-day purpose stuff, this is really great. The jury is out if I like the idea that the Type-C cable can be disconnected at both ends. But if you're looking for that kind of setup, then this is definitely the way to go, where the brick is separate from the Type-C cable. You plug the Type-C cable in, away you go. The other option, if you're looking for a slightly more integrated solution, there is a Chinese company that actually makes fairly decent power supplies. I've ordered a bunch of them to see which ones came back, and this is by a company called, I'm going to try and pronounce this, Chinini. And this is the company that makes a lot of the power adapters for the laptops for System 76. And so they've been around for a while. I ordered a couple of their $22 Type-C 65 watt adapters off of eBay, and I was pleasantly surprised when they came in the mail to learn that they look like a regular laptop power supply, a little black brick, exactly how you would expect a laptop power supply to look like. The cord is then attached, and so the only part that is disattachable is the little AC dongle that plugs right into the outlet. And so if you're looking for the least expensive way to reliably charge your Type-C devices, everything from phones, tablets to laptops, highly recommend checking out the Chinini $22 adapter. If you're looking for a more high-end experience, then I would go with something like the Anker. And then the other device, this I've been carrying with me for, I'd say, about the last 8 months. It's made by a company called Cytec, or Saitechi. And this company makes essentially Mac knockoff products, but they do a really good job. And I really like the way that they've designed the devices and the functionality of them. And so this portable charger that they have designed, it has 65 watt Type-C output on one of the Type-C ports, and the second one has an additional smaller output Type-C port that you can use to charge your laptop and your phone simultaneously. And then under that, you have two regular Type-A ports that you can use for even additional devices. The device also supports that's the next one. So that's a really great choice because I only have one device to carry with me in my backpack and have the ability to charge my work laptop, my personal laptop, my tablet, my phone. All of those devices are going to use Type-C. If I run out of power on the go, Dell has their portable battery pack. Now, this is a Type-C portable battery pack that, again, charges at 65 watts. And much like everything else offered by Dell in the Type-C world, it has a small little status LED right at the top to tell you that it's on, and so you can locate the end of the dongle. The only thing I don't like about this particular battery pack is that it doesn't allow you to swap out the cable. You have to use the one that's built into it. So if Dell would make that change, I think it would be a slightly better solution. But nonetheless, it allows me to basically get a full charge out of a second full charge out of my ThinkPad. Now, the way that I use this, if I know I'm going to be away from AC power for an extended amount of time, obviously it would be inefficient to run the laptop battery dead and then charge it back up using the external battery pack. And so what I've opted to do is plug in the battery pack as early as possible, run that down first, then run the laptop down. And the thing that I like about that battery pack being Type-C, it means I'm never going to have to worry about upgrading that battery pack. When I get a new laptop, it's not specific to the brand. It's a Dell power supply, but it's going to work with my Lenovo ThinkPad. And then the final one is the Leviton T56335 outlet. And what this is, I've talked about this a couple of times on the show, but this time we'll include a link in the show notes and tell you the price, which is $60. This is an outlet made by Leviton. And the way that this outlet works is you replace your standard outlet receptacle in your house with this outlet. And in addition to the two AC outlets, top and bottom, they also have a Type-C port on the left and the right. And so you can charge a device. Now, again, I said that Apple was the only manufacturer that I tested that worked with all of these devices. If Apple was the one that worked with the most, this Leviton one is the one that worked with the least. It works with my ThinkPad, and it works with the Dell XPS. The larger MacBooks don't seem to charge on it. The smaller MacBooks don't. The smaller MacBooks do okay, as does the iPad Pro, and any of the smaller devices like the phones and stuff don't seem to have an issue with it. But I assume it has to do with the overall output power of this device. But what I found is that even though it's a little limited, the standards are getting better. And the other thing is having this available around my house means I'm not constantly moving my power brick from one room to the other. I just have a Type-C cable that I take, and I'm able to plug it into the outlet. And that starts to feel like the future. Back in July, Thunderbird 78 was released. It's just now getting to the point where automatic updates will soon start to deliver Thunderbird 78 to current users. So the previous release, that is Thunderbird 68. So at that point, no more fixes will be provided for Thunderbird 68, and that is going to go EOL at the end of this month, September of 2020. So let's go back into July for a little bit. July, you might remember Thunderbird 78. It was the latest ESR, the extended support release, which means that it's going to they release one of these every year, and it's considered to be the stable release of the mail client for that year. Last year's release focused on ensuring that Thunderbird had a stable foundation, and the new Thunderbird 78, aims to improve the experience of Thunderbird and adding a lot of quality of life and paper cut improvements. This is something that I supported very early on. I've talked about Thunderbird being a fairly underrated mail client. I think it's much better than most people give it credit for. And a lot of the people that go, Thunderbird, and you're still using a local mail client, have you tried it recently? They redesigned the compose window, so they've added a couple more options, taking them out of the menu bars and giving you actual buttons for them. Dark mode is now native, hallelujah. Huge thanks to Deep Dark. It was a plugin for Thunderbird that I used for as long as I can remember to make Thunderbird have a dark mode. I'm excited to see that native dark mode is included, and they're going to be including Lightning, which is their calendar plugin as a core function of Thunderbird going forward. Now, as this release came out in July, and I was kind of waiting to wait till it actually rolls out, which is what's going to happen this week or very soon. And so now is kind of where I wanted to address this, because Thunderbird is doing something kind of unique here. Traditionally, people have used something called Enigmail, which was an add-on used with Thunderbird, which was used with previous versions of Thunderbird to be able to encrypt mail. Additionally, people like me used the Lightning extension for calendars and used an extension for dark mode and so on and so forth. With this release of Thunderbird 78, one of the things that they're doing is going through some of these very popular extensions, very popular things that people wanted to do, and then they're actually rolling that into a fundamental part of Thunderbird. And that's true with encryption. They've implemented the encryption a little bit differently, partly because of technical necessity, but also because they're trying to simplify the workflow of people who use Thunderbird. I can't tell you how many times I walk into a client and that client is still using plain email or still using fax to deliver sensitive information. Because right now, fax for sure is still considered, even by healthcare, to be a secure way to transmit information. They're still doing that for prescriptions. Most of the rest of the IT industry has kind of moved away from transmitting insecure information. Banking industry, healthcare industry, it's kind of moved away from doing that in email. But to the extent that they still want to offer electronic versions of what was a paper equivalent, instead of having an open standard like PGP or an Enigmail, they're using their own platform that they're building, and then they charge people to host medical records or whatever on these secure platforms that can then be downloaded. And so what I like about this story, or what I like about what Thunderbird is doing here, is they actually asked for help from Enigmail and use the help of a migration tool that allows users to migrate all of their settings and keys and so on and so forth back into this new core feature that's centered around OpenPGP inside of Thunderbird 78. Now, like I said, unlike Enigmail, OpenPGP is being used in Thunderbird 78, and it's not using GNU-PG. This was necessary essentially to provide an integrated experience to users on other platforms. But RMP is a newer project in comparison to GPG. It has certain limitations. For example, it currently lacks the support for OpenGPG smart cards. As a workaround, Thunderbird 78 offers an optional configuration for advanced users, which requires additional manual setup. But this can allow the operational use of separately installed GNU-PG software and private key operations. So not a lot of huge feature changes except for the encryption part. And it's an interesting time that they're choosing to do this, because a lot of people, if they're looking for secure mail at this point, have probably moved on to something like Proton Mail, and they're not using their traditional email provider. But the thing that I think that Thunderbird has right here, and why I think this is a big deal, is email is successful mostly because it's an established standard. It doesn't matter what company you work for. It doesn't matter what country you work for. It doesn't matter what hours you work. The concept of email is fairly universal. And so some people host on Gmail, and some people host on Proton Mail, and some people host their own, but they can all communicate with each other. And the thing that is lacking is proper encryption. Now, the nice thing about the way that Proton Mail works is that any other Proton Mail user is obviously able to send and receive messages. And this is good because it allows for very easy setup. And I'm sure Andy and his team have guides, and actually I know they do, because they use this as how you get Proton Mail to work with a native client in Linux, is you must use a bridge. And so they work and build stuff like that to make it backwards compatible with legacy infrastructure. But we are getting close to the point where we really should be moving forward with encryption on email. And so to have your mail client develop this as a core feature and then take and borrow from other places that have already developed secure crypto and then just implement it is a big deal, and it's really cool. And so I've tried a number of different mail clients on Linux. I'd be lying to you if I said that I'd be lying to you if I said I was terribly impressed. But at the end of the day, Thunderbird, I'm able to use it on a day-to-day basis. And this it comes from a perspective of a guy who I've spent my time setting up Microsoft Outlook. So I've seen what the I guess industry standard in the IT world uses, at least from a software perspective. And then all of the rest of the web clients, they kind of spider out from there. Again, 855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. I see in the chat room, Atypical Colonel says that he's in Mumble. I have both Mumble and Matrix on, so you're welcome to join. You can join us in the Matrix room. You can join us over at riot.linuxdelta.com. You sign up for a free account there, participate in Noah's booth, join us in the Jitsi room. I guess I'll take this time to mention, starting next week, we're going to transition away from the IRC room for the on-screen chat and transition over to Matrix. And so we're going to try to tie that IRC back in. So if there are people that are there and want to participate in the show, they'll still be welcome to do that. We're just going to change what it is that's actually shown on the screen. And it'll also provide one place that people can go to both participate in the actual chat portion as well as jump into Jitsi. 855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. I can't drag you in, but we can go over to staging or one of these other rooms here, and perhaps we can talk in there. Oh, somebody got you in. Hey, Colonel, welcome to the Ask Noah Show. That's an interesting name that you chose there.
Yeah, so this just goes to show that Noah's around all the time, because I had pinged him in Matrix about a issue with a Logitech mouse. He pointed me at the Solar software, and that has failed me. So the issue is that the it's an MX Anywhere mouse, the V1, and it is no longer working with the dongle. I can go in and the Solar software sees the dongle, but when I try to pair it, it just fails to pair. Now, there's one single light on the mouse, and it's flashing 3 yellow flashes and 1 red. I don't know. My online search foo has failed me, and so has Solar. So I don't know if you've got another solution.
The only other one I know of, and it's not nearly as polished as Solar is, there is another one called, I think it's called L-Tunify. Here it is, L-Tunify. But it's you have to build it from code. They have a Git repo up. I'll put this in the show notes for you. So that's the other one that you can use. But I'd be interested if Solar is seeing the receiver. It almost seems to me as you might have a problem with a faulty mouse or a faulty receiver. Have you considered that?
Well, and that's what I'm thinking, is it's a faulty mouse, because the only thing I found online that seems to do anything at all is buried in a forum post, somebody was talking about holding down the right click and then clicking the left click 6 times. And if I do that, the error light changes. So there's something wrong with the mouse, I believe, not the dongle.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, that gives you something to go off to, but it would explain why your mouse became unpaired, and also why a Linux program that has worked for me and, as far as I know, is still actively maintained, is unable to repair that back with its receiver.
Yeah, something else interesting is that when I initially I installed the Solar software and turned the mouse on, and the Solar software did not see the mouse. I mean, it showed that it was paired, but it didn't actually see it as connected at the time.
Mm-hmm.
However, when I clicked the mouse, turned the mouse on, the battery status in KDE came up and showed it there.
Wow. Yeah,
So the mouse is talking to the dongle, but for some reason it's not talking properly.
Well, I guess give L-Tunify a shot and see if that gets you anywhere, and then come back next week and let me know if it worked.
Yeah, will do.
that doesn't work, I'll just tell you to go buy a new mouse. 855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. The email, live at asknoahshow.com. So Brown is, back up here a little bit. So your data is for sale, this time by Pandemic Safety Service run by Alphabet subsidiary Verily. So Verily Life Services is owned by Google, their parent company, Alphabet Corporation, and they're one of the first places to try to roll out this program called Healthy at Home. And the idea is a website for software that surveys workers or students or employees for symptoms, and then it does everything end to end. It helps schedule coronavirus tests and manage the test results and deliver those back to the users and the universities and or employers, those kinds of things. The site that is used to schedule these tests looks very similar to Google's Office suite. But if the test comes back negative, there's a graphic that just says everything is fine. If the test comes back positive, or he indicates that he has some symptoms and further exploration is necessary, then the system recommends an actual swab. Now, the University of Alabama system is using Verily's new service, and in their case, the swabs are processed by commercial labs for a small number of customers. Verily recently opened their own accredited COVID-19 lab in San Francisco, and Microsoft has its own bundle of COVID-era tools that they're trying to use to help for symptom screening and test scheduling, as well as mobile apps that can display a digital pass to control access to an office. Oracle, Salesforce, they've all started their own pandemic service on top of their existing products for managing staff and customer relations. Now, I to a certain extent, understand the concept that when there is a need, companies are going to seek to fill that void. And so, to a certain extent, it stands to reason that the entire economy has somewhat ground to a halt because you have people that can't get back into their workforce. And so, these companies that rely on those other companies to make their money have to get their people back in, and they deal with logistics and have all of that infrastructure and automated processes so that when you punch somebody's name into an HR system, it automatically just enrolls them for the key cards, it signs them into the time system, creates their login, all of those kinds of things. So it's natural in some certain circumstances to look to this and say, well, is this a way that we could solve this problem? But I have to ask you, what is the limitation of these tech companies? If I said to you, you're going to a search engine and you're trusting them with your health data, you would tell me that sounds crazy. And you'd say, no, I'm not. I'm just using the testing services. And then I'm positive I'm referred to a doctor. Quote, if a person does report symptoms, they get a call asking for more information and, if necessary, a recommendation to get a coronavirus test. The university can rely on its own lab, but Salesforce also has a partnership with CVS to provide tests. At Kentucky, test results from the University of the Medical Center are logged into Salesforce, and positive tests are automatically open a case with a team of contact tracers who then use software that the company developed after Rhode Island Governor Gina Raimondo asked Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff for help. So let's recap. You want to stay healthy at work, and so there is a service, and this service coordinates all of the testing and all of the health data and all of the notification with all of these other companies so that you don't have to deal with any of this, that it just becomes another software as a service. Hey, coronavirus, you want to deal with that? Software as a service. So Google, also known as the Alphabet Company, has that. The Alphabet Company has that data. They claim that Google, the search engine, doesn't have access to that. CVS likely has access to that data, or at least the aggregate. University Medical Center has access to that data because they're doing the testing. Salesforce has access to that data, or at least the aggregate. The State Department of Public Health likely has access to that data in aggregate, they specify. Tyler Grayhart, the university's director of digital engagement, said that the program works so well that it convinced the university they should spend more money with Salesforce. That was the outcome of the test, is that they should spend more money with Salesforce. Not it helped keep our students safer and help keep them healthy. And no, it worked really well. We should spend more money with Salesforce. Quote, in the long term, it's not a pandemic response app. It's a system for engagement and health and well-being across the university. Tactics being used survey and monitor staff and students for coronavirus today, but it could be adapted for other uses tomorrow, such as helping students with anxiety or other health-related issues. Just what we want. Just what we want. We want Salesforce and the Alphabet Company and CVS Pharmacy to be tracking everything that's wrong with students. Quote, Coronavirus is encouraging people to make decisions with far less time and far less discussion than we've had in the past. And the privacy ramifications of what we are going through across the world are huge. And it's terrifying to me that these systems are not just being proposed, they're being put into place. They're being put into place by large companies who are collecting that data. They're being partnered with state agencies. So if you go to that university, in one particular case that I was looking at, the school system everywhere in the state had no choice but to participate in this healthier at work, healthier at class. It was I think it was Alabama, required every education to participate. Here it is. One of the largest healthy at work rollouts is in Alabama, a collaboration between state government and the University of Alabama, Birmingham, called GuideSafe, tapped Verily to assist testing every student attending public or private college in the state before they return to campus for the new year. Bob Phillips, executive director of GuideSafe, says that Verily has made it possible for students to submit information, schedule a test, check in at a testing site for their nasal swab using only their phone without ever touching a piece of paper, which is impressive. It's very consumer focused. No, it's not. It's focused at making the path to resistance to doing it less. Now, here's the thing. I am not against if you want to take advantage of convenience, okay? I order stuff for Amazon every livelong day for my business because it's a faster way than us. It is faster and more cost effective for me to order things from Amazon and then resell them to customers than it is for me to try to maintain an individual stock here in Grand Forks, North Dakota. That's just the world I live in 2020 as an owner of an IT company. So I understand to a certain extent that sometimes it makes sense to just farm something out or source something out. What I have a problem with here specifically is the lack of consent by the person. I'm sure there's a disclaimer in there somewhere, but there doesn't appear to be a lot of discussion and there doesn't appear to be a lot of informed consent of exactly what people are signing themselves up for. I know that Amazon is taking my data every time that I make a purchase to try to encourage me to spend more money with them. That's their job. But I am very much decidedly not okay with a portion of this success and going to companies that have a track history, particularly in the case of Oracle, of making some questionable choices. And now those people are in charge of data that directly relates to health. And you might be asking yourself, well, what can they use that data for? I'm glad you asked because they Verily has a privacy policy and I went through it. They explicitly state that they're collecting this data for use of research and processing the data for Google services. Additionally, they say that they communicate test results of a COVID infection risk to the university, to your employer. They assess your eligibility to be physically present at work, and those things are then given back to the employer or the university, as well as help to improve the algorithm and procedures and help coordinate with state and local government. They collect contact information such as home address, date of birth, sex at birth that they use to refer for a COVID test if you're selected. That part's not so unusual, but then they say that they may share your information with authorized testing sites, healthcare professionals involved in the collection, or biospecimens that have a test for clinical laboratories and that collected the biospecimens, and for purposes related to performing the tests. They also say that they include the generation of statistics that don't necessarily identify you personally, but once that information has been shared with the university, quote, Verily cannot control how the information is treated or used. So I wind up at the other end of that, basically coming away a little concerned, but mostly just asking before you sign up for 23andMe, before you sign up for Verily, before you sign up for whatever the next thing is that's going to offer you that next piece of convenience. I get it. You download the Amazon app, you click on the button, the thing shows up at your house. I'm all about the easy button too, but this may come with too high of a privacy cost, and nobody is having the discussion about the concerns and where this data is stored and where it's going to go. And that should concern you. Again, 1-855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. Matt joins us. Hey, Matt, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
Hey, Noah, how's it going?
Good. How can I help?
I was wondering if there's a way to use the TPM module to encrypt a Linux drive like Bitlocker does for Windows.
That's a great question. I've not seen anything with Lux, which is the encryption that I take it back. There is an open source project called Linux-Lux-TPM boot, and it's designed for giving physical access to the data. So I'd have to go through here and actually run through and see how this works. It looks like it's fairly involved, that you have to make some modifications to Grub, and actually it looks like they're using a separate version called Trusted Grub 2. So then you're manually adding the key file into Lux and doing all of those kinds of things. But it does look like there is progress on supporting this. I would assume that at some point this will just become standard practice, because we have hardware in the computer we can't take advantage of. Looking a little further, it looks like there is it's hotly debated how to use an FDE key in the TPM module with Lux. So I will I'll dig into that, and we'll look into that a little bit more. That might be a fun demo.
Awesome. I'll follow up next week or in Matrix. Thank you for your help.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for the interesting question. Again, 855-450-NOAH. It's 1-855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. I've never looked at the TPM module. I've used the YubiKey, and because it's one physical hardware device that provides me a couple different features. But I never really dug into the TPM module. Hey, that question dovetails nicely into what we're talking about this episode, and that is generating strong passwords. There are a few ways to secure your account, and this can be any account. An account that you have online, an account that you have for one of your devices or services at home, or it can be an account on someone else's device. There are two ways to do it. Of course, you can choose a password, but to pick a sufficiently complex password that can't be brute force, that is, you can't use a computer program to guess the password, it would have to be so long and so complicated that becomes very difficult to remember. A GPU cluster from December of 2012 can brute force an 8-character password in under 6 hours. And so the evolution of passwords obviously is to make them longer and, of course, more complex, but that becomes harder to remember. And so passphrases were invented. And passphrases are a collection of words, and it doesn't matter if they are easily remembered as long as they're not typically used in a sentence together, because this is what's going to allow entropy. To introduce entropy or randomness, we're going to use a list. It's called a dice words list, containing 7,776 English words, and they're each numbered with a 5-digit number. And the idea is pretty simple. You roll a pair of dice, and it gives you it'll give you 2 numbers. And so you go through. I guess you'd roll 5 dice, because you'll need 5 individual digits. Each number is 5. So you can roll 5 dice at once, or you can roll 1 die 5 times. But you'll go through that list and write down each one of these words. These words are chosen randomly by the dice. The reason that this is more secure is because if an attacker gets access to a server that contains passwords, the passwords aren't typically stored in plain text. They're stored as hashes, and they may get a copy of the hashes, but they're incapable of mathematically converting the hashes back into the letters, numbers, and symbols that the user originally chose. And so in the event of a security breach that exposes the password data, the attacker still has to painstakingly guess the plain text meaning for each hash. Now, that process can be sped up with the use of rainbow tables and what's known about the hashing algorithm. And so to that point, there are some places that dice words are not suggested. One of those, any situation where an attacker can get a copy of the encrypted password and use high volume cracking attempts, this is a bad case. And so, for example, one of the worst cases that you could do is use something like a passphrase to secure your Bitcoin wallet, because Bitcoin nodes have a copy of the Bitcoin ledger. And so an attacker could attempt to brute force cracking your wallet. Even though the password is stored in a hash, as people have correlated a particular hashing algorithm back into plain text and say, okay, when you see this hash, that means that this is the plain text password. They'll pre-compute tables like that, and they are called rainbow tables. And you can load a rainbow table specifically for the purpose of speeding up cracking passwords. Now, XMN in the chat room says that his passphrase is asknoahshow.com. Is that still a great podcast to learn cool stuff? Please don't share. So where a passphrase is appropriate, if you have devices that you sign into frequently, a smart TV, a streaming media device, those kinds of things. If you have computers at work that you use, if you have online sites that you use, and you're going to have to look them up out of a password manager and then type them out. Obviously, if you have the password manager on your computer, the password manager will automatically fill it in. And so in the case where the password manager is always going to do the work of filling in your passwords, you always want to choose a real password. There's no need to limit yourself to the pre-populated list of diceware words that already exist. You can just generate random characters. But in the case where you're going to have to type that password frequently, and so in my example at the radio station, there are certain resources that I have to use. I don't have my password manager, for obvious reasons, logged into equipment that's not mine, and so I'm looking this password up out of my phone. Having a diceware password or a passphrase allows you to type that in. Additionally, the security of using a diceware passphrase increases tremendously. So if you use a 5-word diceware passphrase, this gives an entropy of 7,776 to the power of 5. In other words, it's mathematically impossible to guess with any sort of consumer-grade hardware. At that point, you're going to have some sort of state attack or pre-populated rainbow table, something like that. Now, when it comes to actually cracking a password, I made a reference to a GPU cluster from 2012 that could, depending on the cryptographic hashing algorithm used, cycle through 350 billion guesses per second. Mind you, this is hardware from 2012. Now, referring to that project, they claim that they can crack an 8-character password in under 6 hours. So what that should tell you is that it's time to make your passwords more secure. Actually, it has been for a few years. At that speed, attacking a 5-word diceware passphrase would take an average of 7,300 hours or 10 months to find the correct passphrase, assuming they knew that you were using diceware and developed an equally efficient software designed to try only valid diceware combinations. Now, you might ask yourself, Noah, who's going to spend 10 months trying to guess my password? And the truth is, probably not many people. However, if your account resides somewhere that has any sort of value associated with it, what you have to understand is a new criminal enterprise is designing malicious software that goes and infects servers and uses those server resources to then crack other people's passwords. And so they participate in a botnet. Jeremy Gosney, who's a password expert from Stricture Consulting Group, used a commodity computer with a single AMD 7970 graphics card, and it took him 20 hours to crack 14,000 hashes. Essentially what happened was Ars Technica did a study. And as part of that study, Nate Anderson, who is an ARS deputy editor and a self-admitted newbie to password cracking, downloaded a list of 16,000 cryptographically hashed passwords. Within a few hours, he had deciphered almost half of them. And so the moral of their article was that if a reporter with zero training can do this in like a few hours, just imagine what a real seasoned attacker can do. But they didn't stop there. They went and got 3 bona fide password crackers. And even the least successful cracker of their trio, who used the least amount of hardware, devoted only 1 hour and used a tiny word list and conducted an interview throughout the process of deciphering these passwords, still got 62% of the passwords. Their top cracker nailed 90% of the passwords. So you're asking yourself, what software did these top hackers use to crack these passwords? Well, the software is called Hashcat, and it's freely available. It's an open source piece of software. You might have heard it referred to as OCL Hashcat. Originally, Hashcat was designed to run on the processor. When GPUs started to come out and become so insanely powerful and started to be used for doing a lot of math work on things like cryptocurrency, they also became very popular for cracking passwords. And so a different version of OCL Hashcat to utilize GPU power was introduced. It was called OCL Hashcat. Now they have just combined both of those projects. Really, when I say combined, they've deprecated the regular Hashcat because the truth is nobody's really cracking passwords on CPU. It's just not fast enough. And so most people are doing that with a graphics card or a collection of graphics cards. So if you're doing that, you can download the Hashcat. It's the software is available at Hashcat. Is it hashcat.net? Hashcat? I'll look up the URL and have it in the show notes. But the takeaways there are, if you have a drive or some account that you need to get into, you're highly encouraged to take a look at Hashcat. I've played with it a couple of times. I've never had something I was truly locked out of and been able to get back into. Thank you. Hashcat.net. I've never been able to get back into something that I was previously locked out of. And so I don't have that kind of experience with Hashcat, probably because I don't have the kind of hardware that these guys are using. I looked in, the study was conducted back in 2012, so I was looking at what is available today. And there are people that build $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 hashing rigs just to crack passwords. In fact, the guy who did this study, his consulting firm, I think it's called TeraHash, and that's what they do. They go through and crack passwords for people or test passwords. But 90% of passwords were cracked when using proper tools with a trained professional. And what you should take away from that is that passwords, if they're 8 characters or less, are just simply not secure. And if you go to most sites, the password recommendation still follows the National Institute of Standards thing that says, hey, it has to be 8 characters or more and has to contain an uppercase and a special character and so on and so forth. That's just not accurate anymore. It hasn't been for quite a few years. So if you're looking for solutions there, what can you do about it? The first is you should start using a password manager. I've made this argument numerous times before. I use Bitwarden for everyday stuff and KeePassXC for stuff that just doesn't need to be on the internet. Now, quick word about password managers. The first thing you should do is start using a password manager. The second thing you should do is you should enable two-factor authentication. Here's why. If you don't have two-factor authentication, but you do have a password manager, that means you're creating a directory listing of all of the places that you visit, what your username, what your password is, and probably the exact login place to use that username and password. If somebody were to compromise that vault or that password storage, they have not only the passwords that you're using, but they know exactly where to use it, and they have the username. So if you're using a password manager, you absolutely have to have a second two-factor authentication. You have to have that secured. The second thing that you should pay attention to is not letting anyone get a hold of your hashes. If it's true that we don't want people to have access to our hashes on servers, then we certainly don't want people to have access to the keys or the encrypted hashes for the vault. And so you should use a service and or software that allows you to keep track of that yourself. Now, Bitwarden does this. KeePassXC does this. The reason I like KeePassXC, and I'll get to this in a little bit, is because it allows me to generate the previously mentioned passphrases. Now, once we're using a password manager and that password manager doesn't have access to the private key, then you can secure that password manager with a passphrase. Now, this is something that you can easily remember, and that way you'll always be able to access your vault from anywhere. The key for it is inside of your head, but all of the actual accounts used to authenticate are using very strong passwords, with the exception of the ones that, as I said, you might have to use on a more frequent basis. From there on out, you use the password manager to generate secure passwords from every account. But what about generating the original dice word passphrase that you're going to use to secure your vault? How do you do that? Well, for generating dice word passphrases, you have a couple of options. You can go the Edward Snowden route, and you can take a sheet and put it over your head to avoid any cameras or anybody spying around you. You can take the list that you've already printed of Diceware passphrases. You can go under your sheet and you can roll the dice and write down the password that you generate. If you're one level less paranoid than that, then it is possible to do all of this on your computer. Obviously, there are a number of people that have written open source software to deal with passphrases. And so if you install, there's a program called Diceware. You can install it as a CLI application, and you can use it that way and just generate a Diceware password every single time. And of course, it has a number of different options. So you can generate the number of Diceware passwords if you want them to use special characters, those kinds of things. Make modifications to the password. But many password managers actually natively support this. And this is something I'm really excited to see because, again, if I'm using Bitwarden to generate all of the passwords for, let's say, online accounts, so any account that I'm forced to create through a web browser, I'm usually saving that password inside of Bitwarden. The fact that it allows me to generate passphrases means that I can remember the passphrases to the sites that I have to use frequently. And so having that feature built right into Bitwarden is a good thing. And if I'm going to store it in Bitwarden anyway, why not just generate it there? There's no additional security in generating it that I can see anyway, generating it from rolling the dice unless you believe that Bitwarden itself is compromised. And so KeePass XC, same thing. So there's regular KeePass. KeePass XC also allows you to generate a passphrase right inside of the password manager. The other thing I like about both Bitwarden and KeePass, they give you some indication of the strength. And why that's important is, as I was going through research for the show, a lot of the material that came out around encouraging people to use passphrases was more popular back in 2012, 2013, when they were just starting rolling out. I think these days it's become pretty popular. If you sign up for an account at riot.linuxdelta.com, you'll find that it forces you to generate a passphrase to secure your encryption keys. And they call it a passphrase. They refer to it as passphrase. And so these days, I think people are a little bit more familiar with it. But what you find is that this has been in development for a long time. And a lot of people have been working on how exactly to tackle this problem. And what you eventually arrive at is there's no way you're going to be able to remember all of the passwords because you should be using a different one for every site and every service. If you can't remember all the passwords, then you're going to have to store them all in a central place and secure that. And so the best way to do that is to use a passphrase. This way you can remember the password. The most insecure thing you can do, obviously, is write the password down and keep it around. And this is something that's still far too prevalent in the IT industry. So I hope that offers you some help as to generating secure passwords and using secure passwords. Again, every site you go to, you want to generate a separate username and password for that site if you can. That's going to allow you, in the event that site is compromised, just to cycle that one password and they don't have access to everything else. I think a lot of people don't realize that in these websites, when there is a dump, there's just a file that gets put out that says, here's either the hash table or in some of the worst case scenarios, they'll put the actual user account and the actual password. And chances are, if that password works for one account, that same person has used that email and password for something else. And the last thing I would say is just kind of a general do-all security thing. If you can, enable notifications on your device to alert you when somebody else logs into that device. Oftentimes it will include the IP address, which can be super helpful because if you go to ipchicken.com, have kind of an idea what your home IP is and what your work IP is, and all of a sudden something pops up and it's something that you've not seen before, it gives you an alert that somebody is trying to access your account. And so those are my tips for password generation, password management. And if you need more help, pay attention to the fine folks over at Bitwarden and KeePass XC. They're continuing to move the password industry forward. And again, like I said, the reminder of the password strength is kind of nice because as the password strength and suggestion increases, that bar is going to increase as well. And so back when the standards came out in 2012, that bar, if you put the same password into KeePass XC today as you did back then, it would tell you that it's a weaker password. And that's what you want to see. It means you don't have to trail what's happening in the security world. You just have to trust a product. And Bitwarden and KeePass XC are two of my favorites. What I would tell you, if you're having struggle trying to figure out which one of those two to use, Bitwarden is the easiest one-to-one replacement for something like LastPass. You simply just sign up for an account, put your passwords in there, it will do everything else for you. Works fantastic. If you want to upgrade to the two-factor authentication and premium features, I encourage you to do so, and you can do that through Bitwarden. Just cost a couple of bucks a month. KeePass XC is an open source password manager you can download right from your repos, or I believe there's also a snap package of it. And the thing that I really like about KeePass XC is it allows me to have a separate key file as well as a separate password for encrypting my database. And then I can keep that database completely off the network, completely offline. It's simply read even by a computer that runs something like Tails, which has KeePass XC pre-installed for the purpose of reading a KeePass database. And in this way, if you don't have any Wi-Fi or any Bluetooth chips in there, you're going to be able to keep that completely off the internet. Again, 855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. Dennis writes in and says, "Hey, Noah, I live in the woods and rely totally on my AT&T wireless hotspot for all of our internet. We have a rare unlimited account, so it's a great solution. I'm currently using Velocity Hotspot, but wanted some more router control. I looked at the Netgear Nighthawk, but it's a bit out of my budget. Is there a simple way to allow a basic home router to handle all of my network traffic? I want to access things like OpenDNS, MAC filtering. Is there some sort of ad hoc solution way to accomplish this? Love your show and thank you for your time." Now, there's a second email that kind of comes along the same the same lines. This is Andy writes in and says, "Noah, like many, I use a consumer router at home along as some more Wi-Fi access points. I'm concerned that my router may be sending private data to the manufacturer and I don't really have control over it. It's also single point of failure and I don't know how to replace it quickly if it dies. Is there a good router device for a large home network to provide the router functions, including static DHCP IP addresses? I'd love separate keys for wired and network functionalities and Wi-Fi access. Thanks, Andy." Well, the answer to both of you is the same, and that would be pfSense. The thing that I've really come to like about pfSense is the recognition for Wi-Fi and radio adapters in BSD has actually been very good for a long time. And what we've been able to do in a lot of cases is you can take the SIM card out of the actual hotspot and place it into a regular USB modem. Now, you can go to AT&T's website and find, or eBay, and find a USB AT&T LTE modem. And you plug that into a USB port of a device running pfSense. That device will then populate inside of pfSense as a regular WAN adapter and allow you to treat it just like you would treat it any other WAN connection. Now, there is a downside here that we've run into, and I'll address it. It is that some cellular networks double NAT. And so I don't know if it's truly double netted, but they have a private IP space inside that your phone actually gets, and then it routes traffic outside. So while this may work for most things on the internet, what I would tell you is there have been certain situations in where we've run into some issues with the way that those networks are set up because it's not a true public IP address. And so the way that packets come in, they're identified and stuff like that isn't always exactly the same. But if you're looking just to get a little bit more advanced than having just the options that are built into the MiFi, then pfSense is a great way to go, again, with just a USB LTE modem. I would reference both pfSense to see which LTE modems they officially support, as well as I would have a conversation with AT&T and figure out which models that they support if you're on AT&T internet. As far as not giving manufacturers access to private data and wanting more control over it, you just want to cycle your router, I would say. If you want separate keys for wired and Wi-Fi functionality, the kind of security that there's two ways to go about doing that. The easiest way is if you are purchasing Unify access points, you can just tick the box that says guest portal. And what that will do is it'll drop all of the local LAN traffic from anywhere except the gateway for guest users. So they don't have access to anything else on the network. The second way you can do it is in pfSense, you can actually create firewall rules and tell it, hey, anything that comes in on this subnet can't talk to that subnet, or any people that exist on this internet interface can't talk to that interface. pfSense also has a built-in wizard for setting up guest control, so you can do it that way as well. In either event, the nice thing about pfSense is you don't have to spend any money to try this out and see if it'll work for you. You can go ahead and download pfSense, download the ISO, burn it onto a flash drive, and install it onto a spare PC. Then you can go to Amazon.com, and they have some network cards that are dual NIC network cards. And what a dual NIC gets you is both, obviously, a WAN connection and a LAN connection. So I'll have those cards linked for you in the show notes, and you can check those out. They're not very expensive. They're about $24. There's also some people on eBay that will repurpose like Barracuda firewalls, and there's another, Watchdog is a really popular one. People will repurpose them and put pfSense on them. And so if you just want to buy a pfSense box on the cheap, you can do that on eBay. If you want to buy one with support, if this is going into a business or you think you might want to use it as a business, then you can go through Netgate and purchase one of their SG3100s. That's what we're typically using these days for clients. They have bigger ones if you want it. The nice thing about that is it comes with support, as well as it's been tested by Netgate to ensure that it works perfectly with pfSense. It's become our standard deployment, and I couldn't be happier. OpenVPN wizard, site-to-site wizard, everything is just easier. Absolutely fantastic. Hey, thanks for joining us. We are excited to have you. If you'd like to follow us throughout the week, follow us on Twitter at AskNoahShow. Huge thanks to Sarah, our call screener, JT, our producer. That's it for this week's episode. We'll be back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central at AskNoahShow.com.